This is our first lecture for the school year, and we're starting with animal behavior in Unit 1, and this is Chapter 51, Part 1. So basically, we're going to be looking at what is animal behavior and how do we analyze it, how do we put it into a biologic perspective. Because essentially, all animal behavior is going to come down to a few things. One is that it's a physiological response to some sort of either internal or external stimulus. And so what we're going to be looking at, the body systems, when we look at animal physiology, which we'll do in a few units from now, you'll see that we're dividing physiology into different systems. So in the case of animal behavior, these systems, the major systems involved, are the nervous system, the muscular system, and the endocrine system. So the three of those are heavily involved in actually breaking down animal behavior. So animal behavior is broken into two different types, either innate or learned. And the behaviors are anything an animal does and how it does it. And again, it's a response to some sort of stimulus. So if it's an innate behavior, what that means, I'm trying to get rid of all these little numbers here. If it's an innate behavior, that means it's inherited. It's something that we would term an instinct. So it's not something that the animal actually has to necessarily learn. It's an automatic response. Another characteristic of something that's innate is that it's consistent. We would say that it's fixed. It being consistent also means it's not going to vary very much between different individuals of a species. Now, this is in contrast to a learned behavior, which is something that, of course, an animal learns over, and it can develop over the lifetime of the animal. It's something that's variable. It can be flexible in terms of being able to be adapted to different environmental stimuli. Or with experiences, it can be adapted over time. All of animal physiology is going to come down to, that contributes to animal behavior, is going to have the goal of aiding the survival or reproduction of the animal. And so it's going to come down to helping the animal either get nutrition and food resources that it needs, or in terms of passing on its genes through reproduction. By definition, behavioral ecology is how we look at animal behavior. It's the study of the ecological and the evolutionary basis for animal behavior. Another term that we use for this type of study is ethology. These are the three main founders, I guess is the best word. Pioneers is the word we have on our slide, in the study of animal behavior. They're Tinbergen, von Frisch, and Lorenz, and your book does a good job of explaining what each of their contributions were. So take a little bit of time just to become familiar with their major contribution. The one that we're going to focus on here mostly is Tinbergen. So Tinbergen is responsible for coming up with, among other things, these 4 questions to understand behaviors. So in studying behavior, he gave a framework for other scientists to actually analyze that behavior and answer these questions about it. First of all, what is it that elicits that behavior? What is the stimulus? And then what's the physiological mechanism that help that response or that behavior occur? Also, how does the animal's experience during growth and development influence that actual behavior or response mechanism? And then the third question is, how does the behavior help the survival and reproduction of that animal? What purpose is it going to serve? And what is its evolutionary history is the last question. So we break these 4 questions into proximate or ultimate questions. and they have to do with defining a behavior as either having approximate causation or an ultimate causation. So let's look at what that means. The first two questions are going to answer some proximate causation questions. What is the behavior? How does that behavior occur? So in the example of a male warbling songbird, we would be asking questions like, what triggers the singing? How does the animal actually sing? The ultimate questions that we would ask about a songbird is, why is he singing? How is his song different from a dove's, for example? How has it evolved? So it is again going to be asking, the what and the hows are proximate, the whys are the ultimate. So basically, a male songbird sings during the breeding season, and it's doing this, the how is by responding to a high level of testosterone, which gets released during the breeding season. And this testosterone binds to hormone receptors in the brain of the bird and triggers this production of song. Answers to the ultimate questions are that the male is singing to defend his territory from other males. And also the songs attract females so that that male bird can reach its reproductive goals. Another example is of this red-crowned crane. And a red-crowned crane, like a lot of animals, only breeds in the spring and early summer. So approximate question that we could ask about this is, how does the day length influence breeding by red-crowned cranes? And a reasonable hypothesis for this proximate question is that breeding is triggered by the effect of an increased length of day on the animal's production and response to specific hormones. And there actually have been experiments that verify that this indeed is the case, that animals do demonstrate that lengthening the daily exposure to light produces a neural and hormonal change that causes the behavior associated with reproduction, like singing or nest building. An ultimate question would be to ask, why did natural selection favor this behavior and not a different one? And then again, a reasonable hypothesis could be that the red-crowned crane reproduces in spring and summer because that's when it's the most productive time of year for them. It's a time when the parent birds could find ample food for a rapidly growing offspring, which would provide an advantage in reproductive success for this species of crane. So looking at the different types of behavior, we have again innate or learned behaviors. So the innate behaviors are the ones again that we think of as instincts. And an example of an innate behavior is a fixed action pattern. And there are a few characteristics of this type of innate behavior that you need to keep in mind. A fixed action pattern is defined as a sequence of behaviors that are unchangeable and usually once they begin will not stop until the entire behavior has run through that pattern. So in the case of that's very commonly used as an example is the male stickleback fish. So again, Tinberger is the one who studied this extensively and found that these male stickleback fish will attack things. Primarily, they're attacking other male stickleback fish who have a red splotch of color on their underside. So you'll see if you look at a female stickleback, they have no red coloring underneath them, but males do have this red coloring. And so they did studies and they painted all sorts of different shapes of rocks and other things with the underside that's red. and found that the males would attack each of these things. But if they brought in a model of something without coloring, even though it was in the shape of a stickleback, it would never attack this introduced foreigner. So the attack on the red belly is what is called, the red belly itself is called the sign stimulus. It's the releaser, it's the stimulus that causes that FAP to occur. So it's the sign. It's the trigger for that is going to initiate that behavior. Some other examples of FAPs or fixed action patterns is digger wasps. So in the example of a digger wasp, what occurs is the wasp will paralyze its prey, another insect, and it will bring it to its nest, which is this hole right here. And it will set it aside next to the nest, and then it will go into the nest to just check it out, make sure everything's clean and looking good. And if it is, then it'll come back out and bring its prey into the nest. And what they found is that these digger wasps have this particular pattern of behaviors where they drop their prey next to the opening of their nest. They go in, they come out, and bring it back in. But they found if they moved the prey away from the spot where it was dropped, the digger wasp would look around for it, find it, and bring it back to the opening of its nest, and then repeat the behavior of going in and then coming out again and then taking it in. And they could do this a number of times, no matter how often they moved the prey away from the nest. The digger wasp always had to start over on that patterned behavior of bringing it close, going in, then coming back out. So this is considered a fixed action pattern, and the sign stimulus here would be putting that wasp a very specific distance from the entry to the nest. Another very common example in ethology is egg rolling in geese. So I'm going to stop and show you a short little video of what this behavior looks like. So what you see here is an egg being rolled by this goose back to its nest. But I want you to notice what happens when they take the egg away mid-roll. What do you notice there? What you should see is that even though the egg has been taken away, the goose still goes through the same motion of rolling something back to its nest. And so this is an example of the fixed nature of this behavior, that once it gets started, it has to continue until the end of that behavior or that pattern. So even if you take it away, it's going to keep rolling back to its nest. It's kind of sad. So in this case, what would you think is the sign stimulus? I want you to think about what is starting this behavior. And then also think about what are the ultimate causes of that behavior. Another discussion that occurs in ethology is whether there are fixed action patterns in humans. And there actually is more and more evidence that there are. One fixed action pattern, or FAP, in humans is what we call the eyebrow flash. So the permanence or the consistency of that behavior is that you can find it in any culture. And the behavior is used, for example, when a human adult sees a baby. They raise their eyebrows and they widen their eyes to look at that baby. And you can see that occurring in those bottom series of pictures between the first and the second still photo there. So again, this is something that we find is very consistently displayed, and it's displayed across all sorts of different cultures.